Welcome to WBB's Week of Webinar series. The webinar will start in 2 minutes. Thank you for joining us for WBB's Week of Webinar series. The webinar will begin in 1 minute.
Welcome to WBB's free webinar series, 5 days, 5 topics, 5 ways. Welcome to day 4. It's been a fantastic week, and I'm your host, Don Steyer. Our topic today is greater effectiveness and success in virtual meetings. If you're feeling tired or frustrated by your virtual meetings, this webinar is here to help you. We'll learn some key and critical ways to facilitate meetings virtually for engagement and effectiveness. Couple items as we get started today, just to reassure you how the GoToWebinar platform works and the technology works. Your mic is automatically muted, your video is not shared with the screen, so no one else will be able to see or hear you. For any questions or thoughts you want to share, please use the Q&A feature on your screen. You can submit questions throughout the presentation. If we don't get to your question live, we'll send you a message following the webinar. We'll also send you notes from today's presentation, including any resources we reference. And we'll also be posting this webinar and the previous ones from the week next week. We'll be using the chat box throughout the presentation to display highlights of the discussion. We understand that people learn different ways. For some of you, you learn best by listening to the presentation. For others, you learn best by reading. And we know some of you are note takers and like to reference what you're learning. So if you learn best by listening, feel free to ignore the chat box. There won't be anything in there you need for the presentation. If you learn best by reading, you'll find helpful notes and references in the chat box. And for those who like the notes, take notes. We'll send out a follow-up next week with the key takeaways and resources mentioned. Today, I'm pleased to introduce you our presenter, Kelly Jason. Kelly brings over 20 years in consulting and training and coaching in the private sector, nonprofit, and church organizations, as well as government. Kelly is certified in servant leadership, team building, team dynamics, and core clarity. So where are you joining us from today, Kelly?
I am in Clifton, Virginia.
Excellent. So take it away.
Thanks, Don. You know, if you would have told me a year ago that I would be passionate about talking about meetings, I would have thought you were crazy. And then over the last year, both in person and virtually, I have heard time and time again in my coaching conversations and in team meetings I'm facilitating how frustrated people are with meetings. Either they're bored, they don't feel like they matter, another meeting that could be an email, why am I here? No one wants my opinion anyway. If you feel like you are one of those people, you are not alone. I have been hearing about this over and over again. And then as we moved into a virtual environment, I think that has increased. So today we're going to talk about how do we get more effective in our meetings? How do we make our meetings matter? Because meetings don't have to be boring. They don't have to be painful. You don't have to dread them. there are some really good things that can come from meetings. So we're going to talk about how do we structure those? How do we keep people engaged? How do we make decisions in our meetings? And a lot of what we talk about today is for the virtual environment right now, but also will still apply in person. More important than any of all of this is to just try something new. Be willing to take something that you learned today and try it. And if it doesn't work the first time, give it another go. The more we try things and we put it out there, the more likely we are to change our meetings for the good. So let's talk about that. There's this remote environment that we're in right now with virtual distance that we are seeing have substantial impact on teams and organizations. There's an article in Harvard Business Review that talks about how it can impact our innovative behaviors, the trust level in a team. Role and goal clarity can decline over time when we're in an uncontrolled virtual distance. And so let's look at those words, uncontrolled virtual distance. This article tells us that these do not have to be our statistics. We don't have to suffer from these things as an organization and a team. We can do things to intentionally manage this. There's a lot of healthy organizations that have been really effective in remote environments, pre-COVID and now, because they've learned how to manage these things effectively. A big element of that is meetings. And so as we start our meetings, one of the first things we need to know is how do we structure them effectively from the very beginning? What can we do from the beginning of a meeting to have it make a difference? So we're going to structure those early on for maximum impact. One of the first things we're going to look at is platform. Right now, there's so much of us working around our technology versus our technology working for us. So when we're thinking about a meeting that we need to have, whether it's with our team, our stakeholders, it might just be you and another person doing a performance review. What platform makes that most effective for you? Just because you've normally used Teams or you've normally used Zoom doesn't mean that's always the most effective. And so think about that. Sometimes it might be a phone conversation instead. Sometimes it might be something with everyone on video. Sometimes it might be just taking a second offline. And then also ask that question, how are we most effective as a team right now? One of my favorite questions to ask groups is, what makes you at your best as a team right now? And that right now, a really important caveat, because how we're effective and at our best right now is not necessarily how we're going to be at our best and most effective tomorrow or next week or next month. Schedules change, expectations change, realities change. And so looking at what time of day works best for the team, what day of the week works best for the team, what roles do people play in meetings where they are at their best and they excel, incorporate those into your team. If you have someone that you know is really great at getting things started, getting the energy up, and having fun, let them kick off your meeting. If you know someone who's really good at the data and providing some succinct analysis, let them lead that part. And then think about how you're going to structure your meeting. There's been a lot of, hey, we normally meet all day for 3 days on this. So let's just move it to an all day, 3-day Zoom meeting or Teams meeting. And people are, they are struggling with that. And you see it in the meetings. Trevor hit on this a little bit on Monday when he was talking about burnout in our culture, that the structure of our meetings has to change when we're remote and when we're virtual. So putting those in 2-hour time blocks, giving a break with an assignment. Hey, come back thinking about this. Doing 2-hour time blocks a couple times a day for a couple of days. Virtually, even if your meeting time is shorter, it's going to be more effective because you're going to keep people more engaged and more productive in those times. And then if I have coached you before, you have probably heard me talk about this a lot, creating your agenda with defined outcomes. Many, many times, there's agenda items where everyone in the room is sitting there going, why are we talking about this right now? What is needed from me right now? When that happens, that's where we start to lose engagement. That's where meetings start to feel unproductive. So from the very beginning, before the meeting ever begins, we want to be really clear. Today, we're talking about X to accomplish Y. And that can vary. That accomplishment, it might be, we need to make a decision on this. We need to come to some alignment on this. This is for information purposes, so you can disseminate it to your people. I want to get some ideas on this, a brainstorm. There can be a lot of different outcomes, and there's not one outcome that's necessary for all of them, but to be clear on why we're talking about this. And then set realistic expectations. I learned this in premarital counseling. Some of you have heard me say it so many times. Expectation without communication is always going to result in frustration. I'll say that one more time. Expectation without communication will always result in frustration. If we expect people to engage, if we expect them to speak up, if we expect them to take their mics off mute or to be on video, we need to let them know that ahead of time so they can plan and prepare. And we need to let them know what to expect from us. Here's what you can expect in this meeting. Here's what you need, and to expect reality. My neighbors, I adore, they are taking care of my dog right now because I know realistically I can expect my dog to bark in the middle of this presentation and you not hear anything. Let's respect that reality is going to come into play as people are working from home. There'll be interruptions, life will happen. Let's let that be okay. Once we structure it for success from the beginning, then we look at how do we sustain our engagement throughout the meeting. And one of my favorite things to do is build a people map, or sometimes I call it a participant map. This is literally a list of who's participating in the meeting today. I don't use the Brady Bunch squares from Zoom or Teams or whatever it is because those move and I can lose my place. So I build at the very beginning, this is everyone in the meeting, and then I use it throughout the meeting, particularly when it comes to decision-making time. I also strongly recommend, and this ties back to Trevor's presentation on Monday, starting off your meeting with some form of check-in, some form of opening up a question that builds the team, that establishes trust. We don't trust people we don't know. And the more that we can get to know each other, the more likely we are to be able to have a successful meeting and be more willing to engage in conflict when the time comes in healthy ways. So this can be quick questions. Hey, your top 10 movies. What's a movie that's on that you can't help but watch, no matter how many times you've seen it? If you have a lot of time, it can be a deeper meaning. It can be a question around, hey, what are you learning right now? What are your challenges right now? But taking some time to open the meeting with something that helps connect each other. Then we move quickly into just reviewing, hey, here's the ground rules for how this meeting will work. We're all better. We're all more productive, more engaged, more comfortable when we know what the rules are of the meeting. Then we quickly go over that agenda. Ideally, the agenda has been sent out in advance, and so this is just a quick review. And we quickly go over, hey, here's what we're talking about, and here's why. Here's what to expect from this. Here's why I'm talking to you about it, what I need from you in the room today. And then we briefly open the floor. I've heard some people say, every time I open the floor, it's silent. Or every time I open the floor, I can't get back the mic. Those are okay. Those are okay. You want a second to just check in with people and make sure that there's nothing of a major priority that occurred between when you created that agenda and when the meeting started. And if you're getting a lot of engagement in that time, hey, that is way better than just listening to silence for a minute. So go ahead and take the risk, open the floor, and then you can move on into your meeting. Once we're in the meeting, there's things we can do throughout the meeting. So we've kicked it off now, we've structured it well. Now what we do is we keep it going. And so one of the biggest things we can do is summarize progress. Several of us do some facilitation and team building around StrengthsFinder or Core Clarity. So from that, we know that about a third of the population has a talent of either achiever, responsibility, or both. Those two talents are known for being more engaged, more productive when they know what's been accomplished and who's responsible for what. So let people know that as we go. Hey, here's where we are on the agenda. So far, we've talked about this. We decided this. The next step is this, and so-and-so is going to take it. They're going to get back to us by next Friday. That does a couple of things. One, it keeps us going because we feel more accomplished. Two, it gives that natural check-in for someone to say, hey, wait a minute, I thought we decided this. Or, hey, I thought so-and-so was going to do that. And it makes sure that we get that done right then and there versus saving, and it saves us time there because otherwise it costs us later. When we're not clear now, it's always going to cost us time, frustration, resources later when we're figuring it out. Then we let people know what's next. This is very helpful also when you have a break. So you can say, hey, let's go on a 10-minute break. When we come back, be ready to talk about this, or be ready that we're going to need to make a decision on next year's budget. We're going to need to decide on our activity. Letting people know what's next allows them to shift gears from topics. It allows them to start engaging. And for some people who are more strategic, They do better when they know this is what we're trying to accomplish, so I can work backwards from there. So those are two things we do throughout the meeting. And then we continue to do check-in and polling. And this can feel awkward if you've not done it before, but it is okay to call people out by name. This is where that participant map comes in really handy, where you pick it up and you just look at it and you make marks when you've heard from people, when people have weighed in on something, and when they haven't, to call out their name. Hey, Sydney, what do you think about this? Hey, Eric, we haven't heard much from you. I think you have some expertise in this area. Those first couple of times, it's going to feel awkward. Brene Brown has a great podcast on first times on her Unlocking Us series. Awkwardness is normal those first times, but the more we do it, the more comfortable we're going to get with it, and the more people will expect it. I was facilitating a meeting, and the first couple of questions, and these are people I know well, the first couple of questions, no one would answer. No one would speak up. So then I started doing the calling on people, asking them to weigh in. And I'd set the expectation, hey, I want to hear from all of you on this question. So I'm just going to go down the line and ask each one of you to weigh in. And by the time we got to a next question and a third question, people automatically were coming off mute and talking. And as one woman said, she said, you're going to call on us anyway, so we might as well engage. And everyone laughed, and that's okay, because I'd rather them know that that's the expectation and engage than to hide out on mute and miss the contributions that they have. We do a lot of work to hire these people, to onboard them, to bring them into our organizations. You heard a little bit about that yesterday. And then we don't get our best from people in the times that matter the most. So use those check-ins with people, poll them. A lot of your platforms have an option to poll. Set goals. Hey, by the end of this meeting, we need to have this accomplished. We need to decide this. And then also don't be afraid of silence. And there's kind of two kinds of silence. Our participant map tells us where we have people who are being too silent, and we need to find out what's going on with them. Sometimes that's a sign of burnout. Sometimes there's a concern there. And sometimes there's silence that needs to play a role because we ask a question, we put a topic out there, and then we are too quick to fill in the space. We want to allow that question to sit for a second. No one else has to jump in if you keep going. And so it can feel like it's been a minute. It's typically probably only been like 2 seconds. And then ask questions. Get okay with just saying, hey, I can't read the room right now. How are we feeling on this? Are we good on this decision? Is this working? That allows us to keep the engagement going, to know where people are, and it saves us time in the back end. That becomes particularly important when we're making decisions. Let's talk about that a little bit. Peter Senge wrote The Fifth Discipline, as well as several other pieces. And this will not fully do him justice because we have a very short amount of time. This is a very quick summary of how you use this phased process in making decisions. This becomes really helpful when you're making critical decisions in a virtual environment because you can divide this into different meetings. Also works in person. But in virtual environments in particular, it's hard to know where we are in the decision-making process. So we go through these phases where first we're going to have dialogue, a very purposeful dialogue around it. Then we're going to move into a discussion where we're weighing pros and cons, and then we're going to come to our decision. And I say our decision because this approach is meant for when you are making a decision as a group, when you are coming together to make a decision. This is not the framework that we use when the decision's already been made and people spend all their time weighing in on it just to find out they have no say. That will alienate people and disengage them very quickly. So when a decision's already been made, you might have some conversation around how that impacts you and what you need to do with it. But that's not the same as this approach that's around making the decision. So the first thing we do when we're making critical decisions as a group is we have dialogue. Dialogue is just getting the ideas and perspectives from everyone. And notice that here from everyone. We want to give everyone a chance. Go through our people map, our participant map, and be clear. Who have we heard from and who haven't we heard from yet? What ideas do you have? What concerns do you have? How are you seeing this right now? We're asking questions to make sure we're understanding where people are coming from. We're not asking questions that try and force a decision or force analysis. So, hey, am I understanding correctly that you're concerned about this? That's a great question. To say, hey, how's this going to work with our strategic plan and our budget? That's not that dialogue phase. That's trying to challenge the position and look for more information. So in dialogue, we're just hearing from everybody. We just want to know where they are. And we allow people to take a pass initially, and then we come back around to them for them to weigh in, because some people are better after they've heard from everybody. Some people are better when they can first dive in. We want to control time here. Hey, we want to hear from everybody. So if you start to run long, I might interrupt you and move along to the next person to make sure we're honoring time. Once we've done that, that we know that we understand where each person is, then we're going to move to discussion. In the discussion phase, this is where we ask those questions of the pros, the cons. Is this feasible? What are our risks? We're really pushing here to have healthy debate, healthy conflict. That's going to tie back to what culture you have and how much trust you're building there, because the more people trust each other, the more they're going to engage in that healthy conflict. We're looking here to ask the question, what is right, not who is right. So discussions all around what is right, not who is right. And that means that we allow people to change positions and change their minds if they need to in order to come to alignment as a team. We're looking to give input. We're looking to be open to input. And sometimes we freeze, right? We get some input and we're like, I don't know what to do with that. That's okay. You know, when that happens to you, then that's where you say like, hey, let me think about that for a minute. And in discussion, it's great to allow time for this and to allow a break before you move into decision making. You don't want to move too quickly into decision until you know the discussion's been had. And so sometimes this is a next day conversation to move into the decision phase. In that decision phase, this is where we're deciding this is for sure what we're doing. There's a lot of different ways we can make decisions. There's a lot of decision-making models out there. Generally, the goal is not for us to make a unanimous decision. We're not always going to get everyone in agreement, everyone on board. But we want to have alignment. And alignment comes because, hey, you had the chance in here to fight it out, share your views, disagree. Now we're going to align on it to take it out there. So we're looking at what's best for the organization, what moves us forward in our mission. And then we want to be really clear. The goal here is clarity. The goal here is ownership. What's the decision? What's the action to be taken? By who? By when? This goes into the change management that Deborah talked about too on Tuesday, that what's the data we're using to make these decisions, and are we communicating them clearly to help people be on board with them? More than once, a decision's been made where I've sat in a meeting and said, you know, I'm not quite sure what the decision was here, or I'm not quite sure we heard from everybody here. So this is where we want to make sure we're sustaining engagement and hearing from people to say, hey, this is what the decision is. This is where we're going. And this isn't always linear. Sometimes we get to the very end and we think we're really close, and someone throws out a curveball, something we haven't thought of yet, something that could change the whole thing. That's okay. Then let's move back into dialogue, or let's move back into discussion and rehash it out. It's more important that people know where are we in the decision than to worry too much about it being a linear process that we can check off the list, because we really want to hear what is best from everybody. And then once we have those decisions and we're ready to communicate those, that's where we can go to closing out our meetings. And we want to close out our meetings as strongly as we opened them. We want to leave about 10 minutes at the end of the meeting. I know that's really hard sometimes because 10 minutes means that something on the agenda might not get accomplished. However, research tells us those 10 minutes are always better if we can use that time to summarize. Here's the decisions that were made. Here's the actions that are going to be taken. Here's what's expected of you. Here's what's expected of me. When we use those 10 minutes to do a strong wrap up instead of running all the way to the close, we end up with a more effective execution and people having a chance to weigh in, to engage, to say, yeah, we got this. Hey, we got to make changes, whatever it is. We let people know, hey, when are we going to come back? What can we expect from that? And then whenever possible, to get some feedback on the meeting. Hey, worked well for us this time. What could we maybe adjust for our next meeting to be more effective? And that's really helpful too, because sometimes we're not always the ones leading the meeting. We're the ones being frustrated in the meeting. And this is where you have a lot of influence and control, because you can tell people, hey, I really appreciated this meeting because of this. You know, when you did this, that really worked. Can we do more of that? This is where you have a say in, hey, our current meetings, I feel like I can make them better. So I'm going to take myself off mute. I'm going to come on video. If an agenda item isn't clear, I'm going to be willing to speak up and say, hey, before we get too far down this loop, I want to make sure I know what we're looking for here. What's expected of me? How can I help you on this topic? And so we want to open them strongly by planning in advance and then opening up with some trust building, making sure we know who's in the meeting. We're going to sustain engagement throughout the meeting so that we get our best from people, even when that means we might need to do something that feels awkward to us. We're going to use a process to make our decisions so that we don't miss critical steps or things that are of value. And then we're going to close out strongly for success. Don, do we have any questions from the audience as we close out this one for the day?
Well, yeah, we do. And what I'd like to do first, though, is really kind of back into the 5 topics, 5 days, 5 ways. Really kind of hit the 5 ways I heard from you to be more successful in virtual meetings. 1, structure meetings for success from the beginning. 2, start your meeting strong. 3, sustain engagement throughout the meeting. Use a phased approach for critical decision making based on Senge's model. And then close as strongly as you started. So we'll try to do that with great questions and answers. But the first question for you, so these tips are great for when you're running a meeting. What can you do if you're just a participant or attending the meeting?
Oh, I love that question. There is a lot that we can do. It is a little bit of getting out of our comfort zone. We can be the one to set the example, to turn on our video or to turn on our mics and speak up. We can be the one that talks to other people and says, hey, I'd like to try some new things in our meeting. Sometimes if you have a person who normally leads the meeting that's approachable, you could say, I know it's a lot of pressure to lead meetings. Would you like some help? Would it be helpful if I led this next one, or if we tried this, or if I led a portion of it? And so I don't know that it's going to be overly effective if you forward this presentation and say, hey, your meetings are bad. Can you please try some of these things? I don't recommend that approach. But to say, hey, I learned some things. Would you be interested? A lot of times people would be. And even if they're not as open to it, you can still change some of your own behavior to be more effective, including maybe sometimes calling out people in the meeting and saying, hey, Don, I know you know something about this. Could you tell us your experience?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So another question, what are your thoughts on the value of cameras during calls?
How do I look on camera?
I know what your thoughts are because I have the camera on, so I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
So I would say, we've talked about this a lot, that there was this huge push that now that we're virtual, cameras have to be on all the time. And then there's a lot of frustration. No one turns on their cameras. I don't think they're engaged at all. We don't want to use cameras as the, thermostat gauge there, or the thermometer gauge there of whether or not people are engaged. There's a lot of reasons why people keep their cameras off. They don't feel comfortable with the world seeing their house or seeing their kids or, kind of those kind of things. But there is some connection that happens when we have our cameras on. It's not the same as in person, but it does still matter. And so I'd say at least occasionally, you want to have a team meeting where all cameras are on and let people know that in advance so they know that expectation. Then they have time to prepare. Maybe they do their meeting from the car because it's clean, but at least they have time to prepare.
Sure. How do you manage people in the meeting that are difficult or not in alignment?
I have a lot of experience with this because I do a lot of meetings with Don Steyer. So that really does happen. And outside of, taking over the mute controls like we're going to do in the next debate, there is something to be said about setting expectations from the beginning. Hey, if I want to hear from everybody on this meeting, that means some of you can't go as long. And so to know that I might interrupt you, I might call your time short. And people are not always going to love that. They will get used to it because you don't want someone to dominate all the time because that's where you lose the engagement of everyone else. And then you're responsible for that as the one who's facilitating the meeting. Sometimes too, use the chat option. Hey, can everyone put their initial thoughts in chat on this? And then that way, that gives you a chance to call on people first before you have the people who are dominating. Good question.
So in keeping with that, so you mentioned chat, how do you handle side chats? I mean, sometimes as a facilitator, you wouldn't even know they're happening, but how do you handle those?
I think that there's good side chat and unhealthy, unproductive side chat. So I'm not one who's overly bothered by it when it's benefiting the meeting, because sometimes that's the like comments that we would just make to the person sitting next to us normally. Sometimes Trevor Braun knows that he's on this conversation that when he's presenting and we're with a group, I will sometimes use chat to make fun of Trevor, just because that's and not in a bad way, but in a way that like provides some levity and humor and fun that we would normally have in person. Now, when the side chat becomes the meeting, that's a sign of a culture that needs some attention. There's some ineffectiveness and some unhealthiness that's happening when the side chat becomes the meeting. But when the side chat is just helping people connect with each other, I personally say let it go and even encourage it a little bit.
Fair enough. And so just to end this with my personal favorite, how do you keep from running from meeting to meeting?
Yeah. So some of that is your own boundaries. I know people don't want to hear that, but some of that is what we can control ourselves in terms of making sure that we leave our meetings on time, that we block time in our calendars that are meeting free, that if someone throws another one on there, we say to them, hey, I want to be at my best in a meeting and I can't be because of how these are scheduled. So can we move this by 15 minutes? And then there's a lot of technology that allow us to make an hour meeting 50 minutes, a 30-minute meeting 25 minutes. Utilize that where you can.
Sure. So thank you so much for being here.
Of course.
You know, for the audience, if we didn't get to your question live, we'll send you a message following the webinar. And there was a bunch of questions on will notes and presentations and the videos be available? They certainly will. We plan on posting those next week. And anybody who's registered will get all that information, including any resources that we referenced. So tomorrow we finish up this amazing week with a great presentation from Dave Jerkowski on conflict and anxiety. And since now I know you make fun of me on chats and Trevor as well, I think I have a lot of conflict and anxiety I have to deal with. So no, I'm looking forward to tomorrow. It'll wrap up a great week of fantastic topics, and thank you very much. I hope everybody has a great day.